Hi students, this is Mr. Eckerd, and we're going to go over targets 8 and 9 in this video clip. So target C8 says that you should be able to list the essential chemical elements of life, and those are those CHNOPS elements, the carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Of course, it doesn't make what order you remember those in. And then explain the significance of basic organic molecules, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. And an organic molecule, organic refers to living things. So an organic molecule, these are the basic molecules that are found in all living things. So first, all living organisms, remember, are composed of those 6 chemical elements that make up 99% of all living things. So those CHOMPs or CHNOPS elements, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. So it doesn't matter what it is, any living thing that you can name, if you analyze it, 99% of that living thing is going to be made up of those 6 elements. Compounds. So the compounds that are important to life, one, of course, is water. So you notice that these first two parts of your guided notes were actually characteristics of all living things. All living things are made up of those 6 elements, and all living things need water. So most biochemical reactions inside living things and cells occur in water, and you can probably realize that digestion, any food that you eat is not going to be able to be digested unless you had water in your body, obviously. Even breathing, respiration, you're not going to be able to absorb oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide without water, because that happens in your blood as those gases diffuse in and out of your blood. And your blood, of course, is made up of mostly water. Now it says here you and I are about 60% water. I think in the other PowerPoint it said 66% water. You're going to read some sources that say it's even higher than that. So you know, we're about 2/3 water, and most living things, of course, are made up mostly of water. Carbohydrates is another important compound. These are compounds that are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms that are generally in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. So if you look at the formula, the chemical formula here for glucose is C6H12O6. Notice there's 2 times as many hydrogens as there are carbon atoms and oxygen atoms. So that's that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. And the importance of carbohydrates is they're a major source of energy for cells. That's why I put a picture of jelly beans here, because you know that as you and I eat sugar, that supplies us with energy. Proteins. Proteins are very, very important elements to all living things and cells. All proteins are made up from building blocks called amino acids, and there's only 20 different amino acids. So all the proteins, and you and I have about 2 million different kinds of proteins in our body, and every single one of those 2 million is made up from different combinations of these 20 different amino acids. Now, proteins do a lot of different things. The most common misconception that students and adults have about proteins is that they're a source of energy, and that is not true. Not that they can't be a source of energy, but you definitely don't want to think of them that way. You want to think of carbohydrates as an energy source. Proteins, I tell students, you want to think of them as like the toy Legos. What can you build with Legos? Well, just about anything, right? You can build cars and buildings and airplanes and even people. So proteins are like Legos. The cell can build just about anything with proteins. So there are structural proteins, which are building blocks of different tissues. Muscle tissue, nervous tissue, hair, cartilage, those are all made of proteins. Antibodies. Antibodies are parts of our immune system, and they are in our bloodstream. They're a type of protein. And they look for anything that shouldn't be there, like maybe a bacterium or a virus. And the antibodies can then target those so that other parts of our immune system can destroy those invaders. Enzymes. Enzymes are very important types of proteins. It says they jumpstart chemical reactions. Every chemical reaction needs a little bit of energy to get it going. Like if you take a match and strike it against some sandpaper, it's going to light. Well, the sandpaper, of course, provides heat. That's a little bit of energy, and that starts the match. So all chemical reactions are like that. They need a little bit of energy. This is called activation energy. And what enzymes do is they lower that activation energy. It's not that the chemical reaction can't happen without the enzyme, but it happens much more quickly, much more easily. So you and I have an enzyme called amylase, which is in our saliva, and that breaks down starch into sugar. If you've ever chewed on a cracker and not swallowed it before you've chewed it up, you'll notice that it starts to taste slightly sweet, and that's because this amylase enzyme is changing the starch in the cracker into sugar. The last compound that we're going to talk about, I'm sorry, second to last, is lipids. Lipids is just a science name for fats. So these are non-polar molecules. By polar, a polar molecule would be a molecule that has a positive end and a negative end. It acts kind of like a little magnet. So lipids are non-polar molecules. They don't dissolve in water at all, or they dissolve very little in water. So you know that already. Fat, oils, that doesn't dissolve in water. If you pour some oil in water, it's going to float to the top. So fats are lipids that store energy. That's their primary function. Phospholipids, you can see this diagram right here, that's of the cell membrane. So if you zoom in on a cell membrane, it actually is a bilayer. It's two layers. So here you can see these molecules. I think they look like balloons with two strings attached to each balloon. And this string part, that's the lipid part of these molecules. They're called phospholipids. These are phosphate molecules up here. And this is the lipid. So the lipid is insoluble in water. And then waxes, and they have important water repelling qualities, as you already know. A lot of plants have waxes on their outer edge to keep water in, because obviously they're going to absorb water through their roots. Last important compound is nucleic acids. And there's two main types of nucleic acids. There's DNA and RNA. Now, you may realize that the Na in DNA and RNA stands for nucleic acid. So just like proteins are made up of subunits called amino acids, nucleic acids are made up of subunits called nucleotides. So you might want to think of them as kind of like a train, and the train cars are these nucleotides or nucleotides. And each nucleotide consists of three parts. It's got a sugar, it's got a phosphate, it's got a nitrogen base. The nitrogen base, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. DNA has A's and T's and C's and G's in it. Well, those are the nitrogen bases. There's 4 different nitrogen bases. The sugar is the D part in DNA, or the R part in RNA. So in DNA, and some of you already know this, the sugar is deoxyribose. That's the name of the sugar, so that's the D in DNA. And in RNA, it's just ribose, or ribonucleic acid. That's the full part of RNA. So that does it for that target. We'll go on to target C9, which says that you should be able to explain the environmental effects of temperature and pH on molecular form and cell function. So what does it do to molecules, and how does it affect how cells can interact and work? So you should realize that just about all living organisms have a range of temperature and pH, and of course these aren't the only factors that they have ranges for, but there's an optimal range of tolerance, we'll call it, for temperature and pH. So they can survive within a certain range of temperature, within a certain range of pH if they're aquatic organisms, and outside of that range, then they will get stressed, and if they stay outside of that range, they can die. So you probably have heard this before. If you heat molecules up, they move faster because heat is energy, and they move further apart. So if you subject any kind of chemical reaction to higher temperatures, that's going to heat the molecules up that are reacting in that chemical reaction, and it's going to speed it up. So metabolic rate, which is a measure of all the chemical reactions having to do with energy in a cell or an individual organism, that tends to speed up as temperature goes up. Now, if you get extreme temperatures, what that does is it changes the shape of proteins, and protein shape is very, very important because the shape of the protein is related to its function. What each individual protein does, and remember I said there's about 2 million different kinds of proteins in a human being. Each of those functions is determined and regulated by its shape. So if you change its shape, it can no longer perform its function, or at the very least its function is going to be degraded. It's going to be impacted in a negative way. So we call that being denatured. So enzymes, which are proteins which, remember, regulate chemical reactions, they can become damaged by temperature extremes, either too hot or too cold, and that can cause them to not be able to do their function, and the cell can die. pH is pretty much the same thing. Normal organisms have a range of pH with which they can function. Now, it says organisms, living systems, are usually highly buffered and maintain a pH of about 7. Now, that, of course, is only in certain places. Obviously, you can think of in your stomach, you know it's very acidic. And so the pH is very low in your stomach because the lower the number, the more acidic it is. So the enzymes in our stomach, they require a very acidic environment, low pH. So it stays that in our stomach so that they can function. In our intestine, it's kind of the opposite. It gets a little bit basic. And in order for those enzymes to function, it has to stay in a basic pH. So the point here is that in different parts of an organism's body or different cells, they're going to have a certain range of pH in which they can function best, and they're going to have chemicals to keep them within that range. So that's it for that target. If you have any other, those two targets, if you have any questions, please make sure you ask.